Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to go over 3 really interesting things that you can try within Gavel. So if you want to go ahead and log into your accounts and follow along, we're going to learn a lot about referencing multiple repeating items in subsequent questions or pages. We're going to go over invisible logic and how you can format referenced repeating item questions in your output documents as well as within invisible logic. So this is going to be a really important one if you're just really trying to understand how to use this tool effectively. And this question kind of came up within the Gavel Slack community, which you can join for free. And we have a very active community that we all just try to support each other and answer questions. So I thought this one was going to serve as a really good example of how to do some of these key things within the platform. So I wanted to share with you. So the actual solution that we're trying to look for is something that allows us to reference multiple repeating items in a single question or page on a subsequent aspect of this particular workflow. So here we have, let's say, a children repeating item, and then we have a trusted friends and family repeating item, and the person wants to have these answers combined in a subsequent question where somebody can select from the answer choices with all of these combined together. Now, there is one way that you can kind of do this that is not recommended, and I'll show you why, because it has a little bit of limited functionality. But there is a workaround way that you can do this that I would recommend if you wanted to try this, where you can reference the repeating items kind of in a different, slightly different format, where they're not necessarily in the same question as the answer choices, but you can choose who you want to be the successor, and it would still output and not be as limited or limited at all as this first method was. So I'll then show you kind of go into that invisible logic piece where we can add different conditions to this and format how it's going to be output in the output document. But let's go top to bottom first, starting with your repeating items. So if you're following along and you want to try this, I would say just create a new workflow. You're going to add a repeating item question. Let's call this one children. And then we're going to have the first question just be full name of the child with a variable name of something like child full name as a text question type. Now, we just are doing this for a demonstration purpose, so we're just going to keep it at one question. For the next page, we want to add a repeating item that's going to be friends and family, and this could be the name of the trusted friend or family member with a variable name of something like trusted friend or family, full name, and a text as the question type. Now, what we want to do, as I mentioned, is combine the answers that were given from those 2 previous repeating items into a subsequent question so that somebody can choose from the answers that were given and then, choose whichever is going to be the successor trustee in this scenario. Now, this is one way that you can do this. However, as I mentioned, I wouldn't recommend it, but I just think it shows something interesting about how we can utilize different code and so on within answer choices to reference something that came before. So what I mean by this is, and I'll show you kind of what this looks like on output, is let's say we have child one's name, and then we have, let's say, child two's name here like this, and then we have the trusted friend or family member number 1, and then we have trusted friend or family number 2's name here. And what this would look like from what we created using this method here is a single question that has a reference to the different repeating items that came before it. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. However, the problem with this particular method is that you have to, in order to do this, reference a specific child and a specific position from that repeating item. So meaning that children 0, child full name, is going to reference the first child that was entered. Children 1 is going to reference actually the second child entered. Same with the trusted friend or family member, and so on. So I was able to kind of get around this demonstration by showing you exactly 2 children and exactly 2 trusted friends and family members entered, so we can choose from these options. Now, if you were going to delete one of them, for example, you're going to get an error message. And the reason for that is because it's looking for the second friend or family member, but it's not finding it, so it's throwing us an error. But it is interesting to just learn that we can kind of do something like this, or that we can actually pull this information from within the workflow in subsequent places. Just know how you'd want to use it, because in this particular case, you'd have to know exactly how many children and exactly how many friends and family members were going to be there, no more and no less. So it's not as helpful in our particular scenario, but just to show you how you would get at one level this solution. So what I ended up recommending was that this person ask an initial question on a subsequent page that is, would you like the successor trustee to be a child or a trusted family member or friend? And then have the selections be child and trusted friend or family member. Now I just have this as a single select so that they need to choose that. And then I used logic on the other two options. So I have another question that's single select that says, which child would you like to make the successor trustee? I've given it a variable name of successor trustee child. And then I used the option to reference a repeating item instead of writing out the choices. So I said use options from children, which is the first repeating item. And I want you to reference the variable child full name. Then I added some logic to this question to say, show this if successor trustee, child, or trusted family member or friend is the answer child. So if someone says to this question that they want to choose a child as a successor trustee, then they're going to see a list of single select options that are all of the full names of the children that were entered. Okay, and then the next one here we have another question that is also single select, where we have a reference to the friends and family repeating item question, where we have the full name of that person that was entered referenced here in the single select options. So under this logic, I have show this if this question is answered trusted friend or family member. So what this looks like when we run this now is that we would have that same kind of flow. So I'll just pause this quickly and go through this section. So when we get to this page now, we can see, would you like the successor trustee to be a child or trusted family member or friend? So if they say child, they're going to see the children's names that were entered. Which child would you like to make the successor trustee? And you would choose which one. And alternatively, you could say trusted friend or family member and choose from the referenced repeating items that came from the one that came before. So that is one workaround that you can use. One thing you could also consider, depending on your particular scenario, is using a multi-select instead. I mean, this all depends on what you're trying to do, but let's just say that you had this instead. So you could choose both, and then you'd see all of them at once, and you could choose from either one. But it just depends if you need more than one of something or just one of something, and how you want this to be formatted on output. So I'm going to put it back to single select. And I'm going to choose this second person here from trusted friend or family member. We can review our answers, and then I'm going to continue to the end, which is going to be our output document, which we're going to go into after I go over invisible logic. So you're going to see here that on output, I have the same answer here as I do here, which I'll show you the differences between those in the kind of language I have here and why I would recommend one over the other. But before we get over there, let's talk about invisible logic. So the reason why we're talking about invisible logic in this scenario is that on output, if you wanted successor trustee's name to appear based on the answer that you gave, then the way we have it set up now without invisible logic, we'd have to use some kind of conditions around the answers. So we'd have to put in, if we were going to go with this second method where you have two different questions depending on what they want to choose, child or trusted friend or family member, then we'd have to put in trustee or successor trustee if it's a child, and successor trustee if it's a friend or family member. And then we need to wrap it in a condition that says something like, if successor trustee, child, or trustee, friend, or family member is exactly child, meaning if they chose this option, child, then I want you to show this answer. But if it's trusted friend or family member, then show this answer instead. Now, we don't want to do that because it's really clunky, and we can just actually do the same conditions in invisible logic and have it be much cleaner. So what we've done here is I created a new variable using invisible logic where it's a text variable that's called successor trustee. And then I just left this blank, and then I went over and said add invisible logic, where I just did the same type of logic flow that you see here, but I've just changed it a tiny bit, and it's going to kind of go into our formatting here in a second as well, which we'll go over. So first is around the logic, which I'm saying that if the answer to successor trustee, child, or trusted friend or family member is child, then I want this variable that I created called the successor trustee. I want that to equal successor trustee, child, full name. So we're going to go over that piece in a second, but just bear with me. But otherwise, if the answer is trusted friend or family member, then I want the variable I created to equal the trusted friend or family member's full name. So the reason why I said bear with me is when I first was doing this kind of quickly to show the person how to do it, I chose the variable of, successor trustee child and successor trustee trusted friend or family member in each instance. However, when you do that, what happens is the output document is going to say actually first, instead of saying like the person's name as you'd want it to, instead it would say first, and then it would reference whatever the variable was for this. So it would say first, friends and family. So in a position, it's the first, or in this case, it's actually the second position. So this would instead say second, friends and family, which is not really what we want it to say. What we really wanted to say is the person's name that was entered from that repeating item and chosen from the single select question. So we have to do something a tiny bit special in order to do this. So what I've done here is I've inserted the invisible logic here, but the way that you can get the code that you need is actually this method first. So what you would do is reference this learning or help center article called reference a repeating item question. And if you read through this, what you'll see is that this part here, add variables into document, is really important, because what it's saying is that if you have a multi or single select or drop down question that references a repeating item, then what you need to do is have the variable name of the question that you have the single select, and then which item attribute you're trying to pinpoint, because it's saying that each repeating item may have multiple attributes, such as children, or like children could have first name, last name, date of birth, or residence. So you need to you have to tell the computer which attribute you want them to reference when someone selects that particular choice, which depends on this particular question type. And there's more ways that you can do this for multi-select questions, for example, here, or repeating items referencing a repeating item. In our case, we're using a single select, so we can just use this configuration here. So they're saying, for example, that you would have the questions variable be favorite child, and the attribute that you're trying to reference is child first name, and then their last name as well. In our case, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reference the child or the trusted friend or family member's full name within when someone chooses from this method to where they choose, let's say, child in this example, and then under child, they choose someone's name. So what you can do, and what I did in this particular case, is I went to my Word add-in and I chose my workflow that I'm working on, and I went to simple variables, and I found the one that has child and trusted friend or family member. And in this particular case, you can, change the formatting if you want, and if you need it to be all caps or whatever else. But let's just, for this example, use these two. So I would choose the one that I need for the child, the one that I need for the trusted friend or family member. And what we need to do is actually add this last section that you see here. I added this manually. So I need to go in and I need to tell the system which one I want to display. In this case, I want it to be child's full name for the child. So I'm going to say successor trustee child. So meaning if this one gets chosen, then I want the output to have put the period and then say, in our case, the variable we want references child full name. So I'm going to say child and then underscore full name exactly as it shows there. And then for the one that's the successor trustee friend or family, I'm going to still put a period, but this case I'm going to put trusted F or F full name as you see done here. So I added these on so I could tell the system which one I wanted it to be. Now the next step, because this is not the most helpful way of doing the conditions. So as I mentioned, I want to put this in invisible logic so we can have a single variable without having to do all of this stuff. You just need to get the code that you created from here so that you can drop it into invisible logic here. So that's why you see this configuration here, where I said successor trustee child, referencing that particular question and variable, period, and then the attribute I want to reference and have output. So with this, and you can see that in here you have double curly brackets, but in here you can just have one on each side. Same for here. So that's going to be what we put here, is this configuration that we have worked on to make sure we're pinpointing the exact one that we want to use. So now that we have that, all we need to do in our output document is insert the invisible logic variable that we created, because everything has been done on the back end. So it's super, super clean and we don't have to do all of this clunky stuff over here. We can just say, I want it to be successor trustee and I want it to be all uppercase, for example. And then you just put that in your cursor where you want it to go, and then say insert variable, and it will do all of this stuff for you, and then out will pop your person's name for successor trustee in whatever format you've chosen. So in my case, I had it just output as standard, so it looks like this on output. So I hope that's helpful. I do think that this was really helpful, this article, for the output side. I was having a bit of trouble with it at first because I haven't really tried it that much before. So this was a really good learning opportunity for me as well. And to just share that this is how you can kind of practice is, try to answer the questions of people in the Slack community, ones that you don't know how to do, so that you can kind of try to practice. And in this particular case, I thought this was a fun exercise of going over referencing multiple repeating items in a subsequent question or page, how you might do that. I'm sure there's other ways that somebody else might think of as well, but this is one solution that was that I thought of. And then also that you can make it cleaner by having an invisible logic variable that you then add visible logic to in some conditions with that formatting consideration so that it outputs as the person's name instead of their position and the variable for that repeating item. So I hope that was useful, and I'll see you in the next video.